The morning sun shimmered like molten gold across the endless Pacific horizon, its reflection rippling over the steel deck of the USS Liberty Hawk. The massive aircraft carrier moved with quiet power through calm waters, its engines humming deep below, a mechanical heartbeat of a city at sea. The smell of salt and fuel mingled in the air as hundreds of sailors and Marines went about their routines, drills, inspections, chatter. Among them was Corporal Jake Reynolds, a 25-year-old Marine known for his confidence, quick wit, and tendency to turn everything into a challenge. Reynolds was the kind of man who smiled in the face of orders and grinned while breaking them. He had that fearless spark every Marine admired, but also the arrogance that sometimes came with it. That morning, something, or rather someone, caught his attention. A shuttle had just landed on the flight deck, and from it stepped an elderly man in a faded blue jumpsuit. His frame was thin, his posture slightly hunched, and his hair, what remained of it, was a soft gray halo under his cap. In one hand, he carried a weathered brown toolbox that looked older than most of the crew. "Who's Grandpa?" Reynolds called out, loud enough for half the deck to hear. A few Marines turned, stifling laughs. The old man didn't flinch. He just continued walking across the deck, his slow but steady steps deliberate, eyes scanning the towering structure of the carrier as though he was memorizing it. "Must be maintenance," someone muttered. Reynolds smirked. "Maintenance? The man looks like he can barely lift that box. I bet he couldn't power a rowboat, let alone this beast." The group erupted in laughter. The noise echoed across the steel expanse. The old man paused then, just for a moment. He turned his head slightly, not enough to look Reynolds in the eye, but enough to make him realize he'd been heard. There was no anger in his expression, no embarrassment, only calm. The kind of calm that unsettled the young Marine more than any comeback could have. Lieutenant Commander Harper, the ship's chief engineer, appeared a moment later from the hatch near the tower. She was a sharp, no-nonsense officer, mid-30s, dark hair pulled tight, uniform immaculate even in the heat. When she saw the old man, her tone softened in a way none of the crew had ever heard before. "Mr. Grayson," she said, walking forward and offering her hand. "We're honored to have you aboard." Reynolds frowned. "Mr. Grayson?" "Thank you, Commander," the old man said, in a voice that was deep yet gentle. "It's been a long time since I've been on one of these beauties. Smells the same, though. Oil, steel, and nerves." Harper chuckled. "You'll find the crew's a bit rowdy, but they mean well. Engineering is ready for you whenever you'd like to start." "Good," Grayson nodded, glancing toward the deck below. "Time doesn't wait, and neither do engines." Reynolds watched the two disappear into the lower decks. His curiosity was sparked, though he'd never admit it. "Guess Grandpa's got friends in high places," he muttered. The laughter had faded, replaced by the usual rhythm of ship life. Footsteps, commands, the low growl of turbines. But the seed of intrigue had been planted. Below deck, the air was hotter, denser. The constant thrum of the carrier's power systems pulsed through the walls. As Harper led Grayson through the maze of pipes and panels, sailors and engineers paused to stare. It wasn't often they saw a civilian, especially one escorted by their commanding officer. "Lieutenant Commander," one young ensign asked quietly. "Who is he?" Harper only said, "A man who knows more about this ship than anyone on board." Grayson chuckled softly. "That's kind of you, Commander. But I suspect these young folks have brought her a long way since my time." When they entered the main control bay, Grayson set his old toolbox down with a heavy clank. His eyes roamed over the massive generator control panels, the glowing monitors, the complex tangle of cables overhead. To anyone else, it looked like chaos, but to him, it was poetry. "You've upgraded the stabilization systems," he murmured. "Smart move." These Liberty-class carriers used to overheat under heavy throttle. Harper blinked. You remember that? Grayson smiled faintly. I remember the first time I heard one of these turbines start. Sounded like thunder being born. You don't forget that. She realized then that he wasn't just knowledgeable, he was sentimental. There was a bond between this man and the ship that went beyond engineering. Meanwhile, on the upper decks, Reynolds couldn't shake his curiosity. During the afternoon drills, he found himself glancing toward the lower hatch where the old man had gone. The Marine next to him nudged his shoulder. You really think that old guy's important? Reynolds shrugged. Maybe, but come on, man. This is the Liberty Hawk. You don't just bring some old-timer on board unless he's a big deal. Or someone's grandfather. The Marine laughed. Well, if he's gonna fix anything, let's hope he starts with the coffee machine. They moved on, but Reynolds' mind didn't. Something about the man's quiet confidence had unsettled him. He wasn't just an old engineer. There was something different, something that made even the commander show respect. As the day faded, the crew gathered for evening announcements. The sun melted into the horizon, painting the ocean in gold and fire. Captain Anderson's voice boomed over the speakers, praising the crew's efficiency during the week's trials. Then came the technical update. Civilian consultant Thomas. Grayson will be working with our engineering team on performance assessments and energy recalibrations. All personnel are to offer full cooperation. Reynolds' jaw dropped. Consultant? He'd thought the old man was a helper, maybe a retired mechanic. But a consultant brought in by the Navy for an active carrier meant something else entirely. Later that evening, as the crew settled, Reynolds found himself standing near the observation deck. The Pacific stretched endlessly before him, waves shimmering beneath the floodlights. Below, through the grated floor, he could see faint glows of the lower decks, the heart of the ship where Grayson was working. He could hear the distant hum of engines, the rhythm of men and machines in harmony. It reminded him of his father, a mechanic back home who used to say, "Respect the man who can fix what others break." For the first time, Reynolds felt a twinge of guilt for his earlier words. In the engine room, Grayson knelt beside a control panel, screwdriver in hand, eyes focused. Harper stood nearby, watching him work. His movements were slow but deliberate. Not guessing, not testing, but remembering. "You've done this before," Harper said softly. Grayson smiled. "Once or twice. The Liberty series was my favorite. Strong engines, loyal hearts. They were built to outlast the men who sailed them. You designed these ships, didn't you?" Harper asked quietly. He paused, tightening a final bolt, then looked up at her with a humble nod. "Helped, yes. A long time ago." Harper's eyes widened. "You're that Thomas Grayson?" He gave a small shrug. "Titles fade, but ships remember their builders. They always do." The room fell silent, except for the steady hum of the generators. Above deck, Reynolds leaned on the rail, gazing into the sea. He didn't know yet who the old man really was, but something told him he'd soon find out. Far below, in the bowels of the great ship, the man he had mocked earlier that morning ran his hand along a panel of humming metal and whispered, almost to himself, "Still breathing, old girl. You've got spirit yet." The turbines answered with a low growl, like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. And somewhere deep inside the ship's metallic soul, the past had quietly awakened. Morning aboard the USS Liberty Hawk began the same way it always did. The echo of boots on metal, the hiss of hydraulics, and the deep, steady thrum of the carrier's engines. Yet beneath the normal rhythm of the ship, a new sound stirred, whispers. Rumors spread fast on a ship, especially when 6,000 men and women live shoulder to shoulder with nowhere to hide. And now, Every corner of the vessel buzzed with one name, Thomas Grayson. "Hey, you hear about that old civilian who came aboard yesterday?" one sailor asked over breakfast. "Yeah," another replied, lowering his voice. "Apparently, he's some kind of consultant. Navy brought him in special." "Consultant?" "The guy looked like he should be in a museum." Chief Harper said to show respect. "Respect for what?" "The man can barely walk straight." The laughter was nervous, the kind that hides uncertainty. No one really knew who Grayson was, and that mystery made him both fascinating and unsettling. Down in the engineering bay, the man himself was already at work. Dressed in his faded jumpsuit, sleeves rolled up, he moved between the turbines with the familiarity of a man walking through his own house. Every hum, every vibration in the deck beneath his boots seemed to tell him something. Lieutenant Commander Harper followed a few steps behind, clipboard in hand. She couldn't help but study him. He didn't ask for help, didn't need diagrams or blueprints. He simply knew where everything was. At one point, he paused by a section of the main relay wall and ran his hand along the metal casing. "You changed the cooling system," he murmured. "Yes," Harper said, slightly defensive. "Upgraded it to a liquid-cooled hybrid line. More efficient." Grayson nodded slowly. "Efficient, yes, but risky if the backup valves jam. You lose redundancy that way." Harper blinked. "How could you possibly know that? You haven't even seen the schematics." He smiled faintly. "You can tell by the sound." The old man bent down, pressed his ear to the panel, and tapped twice. The echo told him everything: the rhythm of pressure, the strength of the seal, the stability of the current. He smiled, still solid. "You take good care of her." Harper couldn't help but grin, though she was still trying to piece together who this man really was. Meanwhile, in the mess hall, Corporal Jake Reynolds sat across from his friend, Private Lewis, stabbing at his eggs with a fork. The morning chatter surrounded them, sailors laughing, cups clinking, someone playing country music softly from a corner speaker. But Reynolds' mind wasn't on breakfast. It was on the old man. "Lewis," he said, leaning closer, "you ever heard of a civilian being treated like that on a Navy carrier?" Lewis shook his head. "Nope. Usually they're tech contractors or inspectors. But this guy?" Even the chief saluted him. "Exactly," Reynolds muttered. "Something's off. He's not just a consultant. Did you see the way Harper followed him? Like he was some kind of legend." "Maybe he is," Lewis said with a smirk. "Maybe he built the ship." Reynolds laughed. "Sure, and maybe I'm the next Admiral." Still, the idea lodged in his mind. Later that day, Harper called a briefing with her engineering crew. Grayson stood quietly in the corner while she spoke. "We've got routine diagnostics scheduled for the propulsion grid," Harper said. "Mr. Grayson will be assisting." A few eyebrows rose at that. Engineers weren't used to civilians touching their systems, especially not ones who looked like they belonged in retirement homes. One of the younger technicians whispered under his breath, "We're trusting him with the grid?" Grayson heard it, but didn't react. Instead, he approached the main console, gently brushing aside the technician's hesitation. "You run power through these circuits every day," he said softly, "but you ever think about what they sound like when they're hurting?" The young man blinked. "Sir?" Grayson adjusted a knob. The turbine hum deepened, steadied, then purred like a living creature. "That's the sound of balance," Grayson said. "When a machine breathes right, she tells you she's healthy." The crew exchanged glances. They didn't know whether to laugh or be impressed. Harper watched silently. She'd seen plenty of mechanics in her career, but none who treated machines like living things. By midday, the entire ship had heard another rumor. The old man fixed the turbines by listening to them. It spread from the engineering bay to the deck crews, to the pilot's ready room, to the kitchen. Stories grew with every retelling. Some said he'd been a decorated Navy engineer. Others swore he'd been part of a secret defense project. Even Captain Anderson had heard the whispers. When Harper briefed him that afternoon, the captain leaned back in his chair and raised an eyebrow. "So this Grayson, he's good?" Harper nodded. "Sir, he's not just good. He's something else. He knows this ship like he built it." Anderson's brow furrowed. "Did he?" Harper hesitated. "I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if he did." The captain glanced at the window, the endless stretch of sea reflecting in his eyes. "Keep an eye on him, Commander. Sometimes the past shows up for a reason." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Grayson remained in the engine room, checking readings by hand. Most engineers used tablets and sensors. He preferred touch and instinct. Reynolds, finishing his evening patrol, passed through the engineering deck. He slowed when he saw the old man crouched beside a humming generator, adjusting a small valve. "You're still at it?" Reynolds called out, his tone half mocking, half curious. Grayson looked up, smiling. "Engines don't rest. They just dream lighter." Reynolds chuckled. "You really believe that?" Grayson wiped his hands on a rag. "When you've built as many as I have, son, you start hearing them breathe. This ship's alive. You'll understand someday." Reynolds shook his head. "You talk like she's a person." "She is," Grayson replied simply. "And she remembers everyone who serves her, even the loud ones." For the first time, Reynolds didn't have a comeback. He just stood there, watching the man's steady, weathered hands tighten a bolt with the same care a surgeon gives a heartbeat. That night, a storm brewed on the horizon. The wind howled across the deck, waves slamming against the hull. The crew went into storm prep, locking hatches, securing planes, checking power systems. In the control bay, Harper monitored the readings while Grayson stayed beside her. The lights flickered once, then stabilized. "Everything holding steady," she reported. Grayson nodded. "Good. She's strong." But storms always find the weakest part, in the sea or in a man. Harper gave him a sideways look. "You sound like a philosopher, Mr. Grayson." He smiled. "Engineers are philosophers with wrenches." Up on deck, Reynolds stood watch as rain pelted down. Lightning flashed, illuminating the ocean like cracked glass. His radio crackled with updates from below. Power stable, systems online. But beneath that calm report, he felt a strange unease. Something about this storm, about the old man, about the way everyone suddenly believed in him. It all felt like the calm before something much bigger. As the rain poured harder, Reynolds looked toward the carrier's towering island and whispered, "Guess we'll see if the old man really knows what he's doing." Down below, Thomas Grayson tightened one last bolt, felt the vibration of the turbine through his fingertips, and closed his eyes. The ship's heart was steady, but he could sense a weakness deep in her power grid, a flaw he'd recognized instantly when he came aboard. He exhaled softly. "She's strong," he murmured to himself. "But she's tired." Outside, thunder rolled across the ocean, a warning of what was to come. And somewhere, between the waves and the engines, fate was tightening its grip on the USS Liberty Hawk. The next morning began like any other at sea. The sun rose, painting the horizon in silver fire, and the carrier cut through the waves like a floating fortress. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind only the echo of thunder and the tang of salt in the air. In the galley, laughter returned. Coffee steamed, jokes flew, and life aboard the Liberty Hawk regained its rhythm. But below deck, far below the chatter and sunlight, a quiet tension pulsed in the heart of the ship. Thomas Grayson stood before a diagnostic screen in the main engineering room, his brow furrowed. The turbines hummed their deep metallic tune, steady but strained. He placed his hand on the warm metal, listening. To most ears, it was just machinery. To him, it was language. Something was wrong. Subtle, but real. Lieutenant Commander Harper noticed his silence. "You see something?" Grayson nodded slowly. "She's pushing too hard on the auxiliary relays. Someone's rerouted load from the primary feed. That's not standard procedure." Harper frowned. "Could be an automation glitch." "I'll have the techs." Grayson shook his head. "If it's left like this, it'll cascade when we hit full throttle. You'll lose main power." She paused, studying him. His tone wasn't panicked. It was factual, certain. The confidence of someone who'd seen things break before. "I'll check it out," she said finally. But by the time Harper ordered a diagnostic, the crew had already begun prepping for the morning's major test run, a full propulsion system stress test to simulate combat speed. Up on the command deck, Captain Anderson gave the order. All systems to readiness. Engines to 70%. The ship trembled as turbines ramped up. The hum turned into a roar, vibrating through the floor plates. Crew members steadied themselves as the mighty Liberty Hawk began accelerating through open water. For a moment, everything was perfect. The sea stretched endlessly ahead, sunlight glinting off the carrier's steel hull. Then came the first flicker. A low thunk echoed through the ship, followed by a second one, sharper, metallic. Lights overhead dimmed for half a second, then came back. Power fluctuation. Someone shouted in the engineering bay. "Stabilize output." Harper barked. Her fingers flew over the control panels. Compensate through secondary grid. But the readings were dropping faster than they should. Grayson stepped forward. "Shut it down, now." "We can't," Harper said, frustration in her voice. "The test is active." "Shut it down," Grayson repeated, his calm voice cutting through the alarms that had begun to wail. "Or you'll lose her." Before Harper could respond, a deafening boom rattled the lower decks. Sparks burst from a nearby console, showering the crew in orange light. The turbines coughed, the engine hum stuttered, and then silence. The Liberty Hawk went dark. Above deck, every sound vanished. The whir of fans, the drone of engines, the constant vibration underfoot gone. The ocean was suddenly the only thing alive, waves lapping mockingly against the silent hull. Emergency lights flickered weakly. Red strobes pulsed across corridors. On the bridge, Captain Anderson's voice was sharp but steady. "Report." "Sir, propulsion's offline. Backup power not responding." "What about communications?" "Dead, sir. Internal systems are unresponsive." For the first time in years, an aircraft carrier, a floating city of steel and power, had become a lifeless hulk in the middle of the Pacific. And the crew knew it. Fear spread fast. Down below, Harper slammed her hand against the dead console. "Backup relays aren't responding." "What the hell just happened?" Grayson didn't answer immediately. He was staring at the turbines, still, silent, like sleeping beasts. His fingers brushed the metal surface, feeling the cold. "She's gone into protection mode," he murmured. "Your fail-safes overloaded the relays. The power grid's in lockdown." Harper turned on him. "Then how do we bring her back?" Grayson exhaled slowly. "Manually." Harper blinked. "That system's been automated for years. No one knows how to." "I do." The room fell silent. Corporal Jake Reynolds arrived just in time to hear that. He and a few Marines had been sent to help with crowd control, keep everyone calm, assist engineering if needed. When he saw Grayson standing there, tools in hand, the same man he'd mocked days before, Reynolds frowned. "You can fix this?" Grayson didn't look up. "We'll find out." He grabbed his rusty old toolbox, the same one that had drawn laughter on his first day. Inside, instead of sleek Navy tech, were tools worn smooth from decades of use, custom spanners, a manual volt probe, a small tuning fork etched with initials. Harper hesitated. "Sir, if you're wrong, we could fry the entire relay system." Grayson gave a small smile. "If I'm right, we'll have power before sundown." Without waiting for approval, he opened the main relay panel and descended into the crawl space below, a narrow steel tunnel filled with pipes, wires, and darkness. Inside the tunnel, it was hot. The air smelled of ozone and burnt insulation. Flashlight beams danced along the walls as Grayson crawled forward, his knees pressing against decades of dust and grease. He reached the central power junction, a web of thick cables and control rods that pulsed faintly with residual charge. He could feel the ship's heartbeat, faint, irregular. He muttered softly, "Come on, girl. You're tougher than this." Above him, Harper's voice echoed through the comm line. "Status?" "Finding your fault," Grayson replied. "You've got a short between the primary grid and the redundancy core. Must have happened during the load shift." "How do you know that?" "Because I made the same mistake on her sister ship in 1993. Harper froze. That was before she'd even joined the Navy. Back in the control room, Reynolds paced. "Shouldn't we be helping him?" "He's alone down there." Harper shook her head. "He knows those systems better than anyone alive. We just get in his way." Minutes passed. Then 15. Then 30. Sweat beaded on Harper's forehead. Every passing second meant loss of air control, navigation, refrigeration, systems that kept the ship alive. Finally, the intercom crackled. Grayson's voice came through, strained but steady. "Try now." Harper hit the auxiliary switch. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then, a low hum filled the room. Lights flickered. A turbine coughed. Then another. Slowly, power crawled its way back through the Liberty Hawk's veins. Cheers erupted. The sound was deafening, pure relief and disbelief. Grayson emerged minutes later, covered in grease, hands blackened, his jumpsuit torn at the elbow. He wiped his forehead with a rag and looked around. "Your backup grid's patched, but you'll want to replace the converter module. It's running hot." Harper stared at him in awe. "How did you do that?" "Those systems are buried behind 6 layers of modern automation." Grayson shrugged. "When I designed them, I knew computers might fail. So I left a way to talk to her by hand." Reynolds' mouth fell open. "You what?" Grayson turned to him for the first time. "Son, I built her bones before you ever set foot on deck. You thought I couldn't power a rowboat, but I gave this ship her heartbeat." Reynolds couldn't speak. The words hit harder than any reprimand ever could. Hours later, the ship was fully powered again. Systems stable, turbines steady, crew morale soaring. But no one forgot the silence, the eerie feeling of being stranded, powerless, at the mercy of the sea. Captain Anderson made an announcement over the loudspeaker. "To the crew of the Liberty Hawk, we are back online thanks to Mr. Thomas Grayson. His expertise and composure saved this vessel today. He has our deepest respect." Applause thundered through every deck. Reynolds stood in the hangar bay, watching engineers swarm around Grayson as he gave calm instructions. He felt something shift inside him, the weight of humility. When Grayson passed him later, the old man gave a small nod. "You did good today, Marine. You didn't panic." Reynolds nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "You did better, sir." Grayson smiled faintly. "No, the ship did. She's got spirit." As he walked away, Reynolds stared at the toolbox swinging by his side, the same old box he'd laughed at. Now it looked like something sacred. That night, The stars shone bright over the Pacific. The Liberty Hawk glided across calm waters once more, her lights blazing proudly against the dark sea. But deep inside her core, one man's touch had brought her back to life, and every sailor aboard would remember it for years. Yet Grayson knew something no one else did. This wasn't over. The power failure had been more than a glitch. It was a warning. The ship still carried a flaw, one that could bring her down again. And next time, they might not be so lucky. The ocean stretched endless and calm the next morning. The USS Liberty Hawk moved steadily, her turbines humming with renewed strength. Every corridor, every compartment seemed alive again after the blackout. But beneath the laughter and relief, whispers floated among the crew about the old man who had saved the ship. No one quite knew who Thomas Grayson really was. Some said he was a retired engineer brought back on a contract. Others swore he'd once been part of a top-secret Navy project. The younger sailors called him the ghost of the shipyard. To Jake Reynolds, though, he was something else entirely, a reminder of shame. Reynolds sat alone in the mess hall, staring at his untouched tray of eggs. The memory of his bet, the moment he mocked Grayson, calling him too old to lift a wrench, burned in his mind like acid. He replayed the scene again and again, wishing he could take back every word. He had grown up believing strength was in youth and muscle. But the old man had shown him what real strength looked like, calm, steady, earned through years of scars and storms. "Mind if I sit?" a voice said. Reynolds looked up. Lieutenant Commander Harper stood there, coffee mug in hand. "Of course, ma'am." She sat down, glancing around the quiet hall. "You're not the only one thinking about him." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "You too?" Harper nodded. He shouldn't even have known those systems existed. Half. The control modules he touched were redesigned 10 years ago, but he knew exactly where to look. Like he built them himself. Reynolds frowned. "Wait, you mean?" She leaned in. "That's the thing. The Liberty Hawk's original engineering design, the core power grid, the emergency bypasses, was written by a man named Commander Thomas A. Grayson, back in the 1980s. Reynolds blinked, stunned. "So, he's that Grayson?" "Looks like it," she said quietly. "The man who helped build this ship. The Navy thought he retired years ago, after an accident at sea." Later that day, Harper confirmed it with the ship's archives. There it was, in faded ink: Chief Engineer, Naval Design Bureau, Commander Thomas Andrew Grayson. Service record classified after 1994. No one on board could believe it. When word spread, the tone aboard the Liberty Hawk changed completely. Men who had ignored him now saluted when he passed. Officers gave him quiet nods of respect. Even the cocky Marines who had once laughed at his toolbox now spoke his name with reverence. But Grayson himself stayed the same. He walked the decks, humbly checking panels, listening to engines, and offering calm advice to anyone who'd listen. He never mentioned the blackout, nor took credit for saving the ship. To him, it wasn't about glory. It was about duty. That evening, Harper found him sitting alone at the stern of the carrier, watching the sunset melt into the sea. The orange glow painted his face in warmth, but his eyes held a quiet distance, as if he were somewhere else entirely. "You knew we'd lose power, didn't you?" she asked gently. Grayson nodded slightly. "I saw the readings shifting 2 days before. Could have fixed it sooner, but I wanted to see how your new systems handled failure." "And?" He gave a faint smile. "They handled it about as well as humans do. Panic first, recover later." Harper chuckled softly. "You never told us you built this ship." Grayson's smile faded. He stared out at the water. "I didn't think it mattered anymore. After what you did, I'd say it matters a lot." He was silent for a long time before finally saying, "I walked away from this life for a reason, Commander. Some ghosts shouldn't be disturbed. Harper tilted her head. What happened, sir? For a moment, he didn't answer. The waves crashed softly against the hull. Then he said quietly, My son. Years ago, long before the Liberty Hawk's current crew was even born, Commander Thomas Grayson had been one of the Navy's brightest engineers. He'd designed propulsion systems, power grids, and fail-safes that made U.S. carriers nearly unsinkable. But in 1994, tragedy struck. During a classified propulsion test in the Atlantic, a young naval technician, Grayson's only son Michael, was among the crew. A coolant valve malfunctioned, triggering a containment breach. Grayson had been in charge of the design. By the time emergency teams reached the engine bay, the leak had ignited. Michael was gone. Grayson blamed himself. Though the official report called it an unforeseeable mechanical failure, he knew that every system, every circuit, bore his name. He resigned quietly, disappeared from public record, and refused every offer the Navy sent afterward. For 30 years, he lived by the docks of Norfolk, repairing fishing boats and teaching local kids about engines. Until the Navy, desperate for someone who could inspect the Liberty Hawk's aging systems, found him again. He agreed only under one condition: no rank, no title, and no public recognition. As Harper listened, the truth sank deep. The quiet sadness in his eyes wasn't just from age. It was the weight of memory. I thought if I stayed away, Grayson said softly, I could bury what happened. But you can't bury the ocean. It always finds its way back. Harper nodded slowly. You didn't have to come back, though. Why did you? He smiled faintly. Because someone needed to make sure she still had a heartbeat. The simplicity of his answer hit her like a wave. It wasn't about redemption. It was about love, love for the ship, for the people who sailed her, for the craft he had once lived and bled for. Meanwhile, in the lower deck barracks, Reynolds sat with a few Marines, listening to the stories spreading like wildfire. One of the engineers, Petty Officer Lee, said, You know the original Liberty Hawk's blueprints? They say Grayson hid a handwritten note inside the frame before she was sealed. Something about her heart belongs to the sea. Reynolds shook his head in disbelief. Man, I treated him like some washed-up mechanic. Lee smirked. You're not the first Marine to underestimate an old sailor. That night, Reynolds couldn't sleep. He kept seeing Grayson's calm face in the chaos of the blackout, the steady hands, the quiet voice. Every instinct in him wanted to make it right. The next morning, Reynolds found Grayson in the engine bay, tightening a set of bolts. Sir, Reynolds said, standing straight. Grayson didn't look up. You don't need to call me sir, son. I'm retired. Not to me, you're not. Reynolds hesitated, then added, I wanted to apologize. For the bet, the jokes. Everything, I was wrong. Grayson tightened the last bolt, then looked at him. His eyes were steady, kind. Young men are supposed to be wrong sometimes. That's how they learn what right looks like. Reynolds swallowed hard. You saved us all. I just wanted you to know we won't forget that. Grayson nodded slowly. Don't remember me, Marine? Remember the ship. She's what matters. But Reynolds couldn't forget. None of them could. Later that evening, Harper reported Grayson's past to Captain Anderson, who listened in silence. When she finished, the captain stood and said quietly, He deserves more than a thank you. He deserves recognition. But when Anderson went to find him, Grayson was gone. His quarters were empty. His toolbox was missing. All that remained on the small desk was a folded note addressed to the captain. The ship is strong again. That's all that matters. T. A. Grayson. And beneath it, a small Navy pin, his old insignia. For 2 days, the crew searched every corner of the carrier, but Grayson had vanished. Some said he'd taken a supply boat at dawn, heading for the nearest port. Others believed he'd simply wanted to disappear again, leaving only the hum of engines as proof he'd been there at all. But one thing was certain. The old man who had once built the Liberty Hawk had brought her back to life one last time. And though he was gone, his presence lingered. In the rhythm of the turbines, in the strength of the steel, in the lessons left behind. Reynolds stood by the railing that night, looking out over the dark sea. Somewhere out there, the man he had once laughed at was sailing quietly into the horizon. And the Marine whispered, almost to himself, "Fair winds, old man, fair winds." The wind carried his words into the waves. And far beyond the reach of the ship's lights, a small vessel moved steadily east, guided by an invisible compass, the kind only sailors carried in their hearts. The USS Liberty Hawk continued its voyage across the Pacific, engines thrumming with new strength. But to those who had witnessed the blackout, the ship felt different. It wasn't just the hum of power returning, it was the spirit that had been rekindled. The old man's hands had left a mark deeper than steel. Yet something lingered, an emptiness that not even full power could fill. 3 days had passed since Thomas Grayson vanished. The captain, the officers, the engineers, even the Marines, spoke his name like a legend whispered in reverence. But officially, there was no record of him aboard. His name wasn't in the crew manifest. His clearance ID was outdated by decades. To the Navy's database, he didn't exist. Captain Anderson stood at the helm, reading the note Grayson had left for what felt like the 100th time. The words were few, but they carried the quiet finality of a man who had made peace with his ghosts. The ship is strong again. That's all that matters. T.A. Grayson. Anderson folded the note gently. He wasn't the sentimental type, but this one mattered. The man had done more than save a ship. He had reminded everyone what it meant to serve with heart. But there were questions the captain couldn't ignore. "Commander Harper," he said, turning toward her, "send word to the Pentagon. Request a full background check on a retired Commander Thomas Andrew Grayson. I want his service file, his assignments, everything." Harper hesitated. "Sir, his record was listed as classified when I checked the archives. We might need higher clearance." Anderson gave a half-smile. "Then it's a good thing an admiral owes me a favor." 2 days later, deep inside the Pentagon, Admiral Jonathan Pierce sat behind a desk covered in files. His sharp gray eyes scanning the request stamped priority, USS Liberty Hawk incident. Pierce had served long enough to know that when Captain Anderson called, it wasn't for gossip. If Anderson said someone had saved a carrier, it was true. He entered the name Thomas A. Grayson into the secure Navy database. The screen blinked for a moment, then produced a single classified file with a red header. Restricted access. Project Arclight. Pierce frowned. That name hadn't surfaced in decades. He opened the file with his Admiral override. Inside were personnel records, technical diagrams, and one faded black and white photo. A younger Thomas Grayson, in full uniform, standing beside a massive engine prototype. His expression was calm, confident, but his eyes held a quiet intensity. Pierce leaned back, exhaling. Well, I'll be damned. He remembered now. Project Arclight, a secret propulsion initiative from the late Cold War years. Grayson had been one of its lead designers. Rumor had it he'd developed an emergency hybrid power system that could keep a carrier operational even after catastrophic failure. But the project was shelved after a test explosion killed several crew members, including Grayson's son. Most assumed Grayson retired in shame. But the truth was more complicated. Pierce scrolled further. The final line of the file read, "Subject voluntarily resigned. Psychological evaluation suggests survivor's guilt. Clearance retained under restricted conditions. Subject location, Norfolk, VA." He picked up the phone. Get me Captain Anderson aboard the Liberty Hawk. Back aboard the carrier, Anderson's private line buzzed. Admiral Pierce here, came the voice on the other end. So it's true. You've got Thomas Grayson aboard. Had, Anderson corrected. He's gone. Slipped away 2 days ago. There was a pause. Then the Admiral said quietly, Anderson, do you have any idea who that man really is? I know he's a hero who saved my ship. Pierce's tone hardened. He's more than that. He built half the systems keeping it afloat. And if I'm reading this right, he might have just saved the entire Pacific Fleet from a major vulnerability. Anderson frowned. Explain. Pierce sighed. Grayson's designs weren't just for the Liberty Hawk. His fail-safe architecture was used in every carrier built after 1989. But there's a problem. The Navy never completed this redundancy protocols he created. We thought they were outdated. What happened on your ship proves they weren't. Anderson felt his pulse quicken. So you're saying? I'm saying every carrier out there has the same weakness yours did. And the only man who knows how to fix it is the one you just lost. The revelation spread through the bridge like wildfire. The crew had seen Grayson as a savior, but now they realized he wasn't just fixing one ship. He had saved them from a system-wide disaster waiting to happen. Harper turned to the captain. Sir, if we find him, can we convince him to come back? Anderson rubbed his jaw. He's not a man you convince. He's a man you earn. Then he looked up, resolve firm in his voice. We find him. The next morning, a search order went out across the Pacific. Navy patrols checked every port between Guam and Hawaii. Communications officers sent encrypted pings to coastal stations. Civilian harbors received quiet inquiries about an elderly man traveling alone in a small maintenance boat. Meanwhile, Reynolds and the engineering crew volunteered to sweep the coastal areas once they docked for refueling. The Marines teased him at first. You looking for your grandpa, Reynolds? But Reynolds didn't laugh. He just said, that man's the reason you're still breathing. Silence followed. Days passed. Still no sign. But one morning, as the Liberty Hawk neared the coastline of San Diego for maintenance, a message arrived through encrypted channel. Civilian vessel Mariner's Hope docked at Port Mendocino. Operator matches description of retired Navy commander. Ship registered under alias Thomas A. Gray, requesting confirmation. Harper read it aloud, and for the first time in days, Anderson smiled. He's alive. Reynolds, who had been assisting on deck, overheard. You found him? Anderson nodded. We're sending a team. And Marine, you're coming with. When they reached Port Mendocino, the fog hung thick over the docks. Fishing boats creaked against the piers. Seagulls cried in the distance. And there, moored at the far end of the pier, was a small, weathered vessel, Mariner's Hope. Its hull was chipped, but freshly cleaned. Tools were neatly arranged on deck. It looked like home. Grayson sat on the dock's edge, feeding crumbs to a stray dog, wearing the same faded jacket and cap. When he saw the approaching figures, uniforms glinting with insignia, he sighed softly, almost knowing this moment would come. Captain Anderson saluted first. Commander Thomas Grayson, sir. Grayson chuckled quietly. Haven't heard that in a while. Reynolds stepped forward, eyes shining with respect. We came to thank you. And to ask for your help. Grayson shook his head slowly. I'm done helping the Navy. I gave it everything I had. Anderson took a step closer. You saved the Liberty Hawk, Commander. But Admiral Pierce believes your designs are the only thing standing between the fleet and another catastrophe. Grayson's hands stilled. Pierce? Yes, sir. He said you were part of Project Arclight. The old man looked away, staring out over the sea. That project died with my son. Anderson's voice softened. Then help us make sure no one else's son dies the same way. For a long time, Grayson didn't move. The only sounds were the waves slapping against the dock and the distant hum of engines. Then finally, he stood. "Give me 48 hours," he said quietly. "I'll need to see the original schematics. The Navy systems have changed. I'll have to trace every flaw manually." Reynolds blinked. "You'll do it?" Grayson smiled faintly. "I built her bones, Marine. I'm not letting her fall apart now." That night, under the golden glow of the dock lights, Thomas Grayson sat at a workbench on his small boat. Before him lay a pile of diagrams, circuit blueprints, and maintenance logs sent from the Pentagon. His hands, though aged, moved with precision, sketching corrections, marking weak points, and drafting new fail-safes by hand. He worked through the night, fueled by quiet purpose and memory. Somewhere between the pages, he found not just flaws in machines, but peace for the first time in 30 years. By dawn, the old man closed his notebook, eyes tired but clear. The dog slept at his feet. The sun rose, painting the sea gold again, the same sea that had taken so much from him, now giving him something back. He whispered softly to himself, "One last job, son. For you." And as the first Navy helicopter approached the port to retrieve him, its rotors thundering above, Thomas Grayson stood tall once more, not as a ghost of the past, but as the man who would once again save the fleet. The Navy transport helicopter cut through the morning fog as it carried Thomas Grayson toward San Diego Naval Command. The rhythmic hum of the rotors blended with the crash of distant waves below. For most passengers, it was just another flight. But for Grayson, every mile brought him closer to the ghosts he'd spent 30 years trying to outrun. Across from him sat Captain Anderson, eyes steady and calm. Beside them, Corporal Jake Reynolds watched quietly, still unable to believe he was sharing a chopper with the man he once mocked. No one spoke for the first hour. Finally, Anderson broke the silence. "You could have refused, Commander. You didn't owe us anything." Grayson looked out the window, his reflection ghostly against the clouds. "Maybe I didn't," he said softly. "But I owe the sea something. She took too much to leave her broken." Reynolds glanced up. "You really think this design flaw could sink other carriers?" Grayson turned toward him, eyes sharp despite his age. "If someone wanted to cripple the fleet, they wouldn't need torpedoes. They'd just have to exploit this weakness. One overload in the wrong sequence, and an entire vessel would lose propulsion. A sitting target." Anderson's jaw tightened. "Then let's make sure that never happens." When the helicopter landed at Naval Command, Admiral Jonathan Pierce himself was waiting. Time had weathered his face, but his presence was still commanding. A man who carried authority like a second uniform. As Grayson stepped out, Pierce extended his hand. "It's been a long time, Tom." Grayson hesitated, then shook it. "Longer than it should have been." Pierce smiled faintly. "You should have let us bring you back years ago." Grayson's voice was calm. "I wasn't ready to face these halls again." Pierce nodded in understanding. "You're here now, and we need you." Inside the secure engineering wing, holographic blueprints of multiple aircraft carriers floated in the air. Engineers, officers, and analysts stood around a circular table, their faces tense. Pierce gestured to the central projection, the cross-section of the Liberty Hawk's power core. "This," he said, "is the heart of every Nimitz-class and Ford-class carrier in service. And the man who designed it," he nodded toward Grayson, "is standing right here." The room fell silent. Grayson stepped forward. His old Navy ID had been reactivated, though the rank felt like a ghost he no longer wore. He adjusted his glasses and studied the hologram. "Show me the secondary relay network," he said. A technician complied. The lines glowed red across the display. Grayson frowned. There's your problem. You restructured the fail-safe architecture around automated regulators instead of manual overrides. You've traded reliability for convenience. An engineer spoke up nervously. With respect, sir, automation increased efficiency by 15%. Efficiency doesn't win wars. Grayson interrupted sharply. Survivability does. When everything fails, you need a human hand that knows what to do. That's what you removed. The words hit hard. The room went silent again. For the next 10 hours, Grayson worked like a man half his age. His movements were steady, his mind razor-sharp. He traced circuits, adjusted schematics, and explained each modification with simple clarity that turned complex systems into common sense. Young engineers gathered around him like students before a master. Reynolds, who had been granted special observation permission, stood quietly at the back, watching every move. It was like witnessing an artist painting his masterpiece, except the canvas was steel and electricity. At one point, an officer asked, "Sir, when did you learn all this by memory?" Grayson gave a small smile. When you build something with your hands, you never forget where every bolt goes. You just forget why it mattered. Until it does again. By evening, the conference room lights dimmed as the final simulation loaded. Grayson had rewritten the ship's entire power contingency plan, manually, without relying on AI assistance. Pierce crossed his arms. "All right, Tom, let's see if it works." The simulation began. The holographic Liberty Hawk powered up, its turbines spinning. Then a simulated overload hit, a direct recreation of the blackout. The screen flickered, alarms blared, then stabilized. Backup systems engaged perfectly. Power restored. Systems held. Engines continued to hum at full strength. The room erupted in applause. Grayson simply watched, silent. For him, the satisfaction wasn't in the clapping. It was in the sound of steady, uninterrupted energy. A ship alive. Pierce approached him quietly. "You've done it again, old friend. You've given us something no algorithm ever could." Grayson shook his head. "All I did was remind her how to breathe." Later that night, Pierce and Anderson joined Grayson on the observation deck overlooking the harbor. The city lights shimmered across the water, and docked carriers stood like sleeping giants. Pierce leaned on the rail. "You know, Tom, there's talk in Washington about reinstating your commission. Maybe even an honorary commendation." Grayson chuckled. "What would I do with a medal, John? Hang it in a workshop full of wrenches?" Anderson smiled faintly. "You'd deserve it." Grayson gazed out at the ships. "What I deserve isn't the point. I failed once. I won't fail again." Pierce placed a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't fail. You tried to save your son, and the Navy blamed the wrong man." The words hung heavy between them. Grayson said nothing, but the pain in his eyes softened. Over the next few weeks, Grayson worked with a select engineering team to implement his redesigned system across multiple carriers. He moved from ship to ship, the Constellation, the Roosevelt, the Reagan, guiding young officers through the old ways of understanding machinery, not just managing it. He didn't lecture. He listened. When a young technician once asked, "Sir, why not let the computers handle emergency recalibration?" Grayson simply replied, "Because computers don't care if the ship sinks. People do." Word spread across the fleet. The old commander was back. Sailors began to call him the architect, half in awe, half in affection. Even Admiral Pierce noticed a shift in morale. Crews trained harder, engineers double-checked systems, and young officers spoke of legacy rather than technology. One evening, Reynolds approached Grayson outside the engineering bay. The Marine looked nervous but determined. "Sir, I've been thinking," he began. I want to transfer into engineering support. I want to learn this. The real stuff. Grayson looked at him with amusement. You? A Marine who wants to work with wrenches? Reynolds smiled sheepishly. I figure I owe it to the man I once bet against. Grayson chuckled softly. You don't owe me anything, son. But if you're serious, come by tomorrow. Bring gloves. And patience. Reynolds grinned. Aye, sir. That night, Grayson stayed late in the lab, going over the last series of diagnostics. The room was quiet, except for the low hum of power lines and the distant sound of waves outside. He stared at the blueprints, his blueprints, one final time. The lines were perfect. The systems balanced. The design complete. But as he traced the last circuit with his finger, a memory flashed. His son's voice laughing in the engine bay, the smell of oil and salt, the blinding light of an explosion that took everything away. He closed his eyes. For years, that memory had been a wound. Now it felt like closure. He whispered into the silence, You'd be proud, Mike. She's safe now. At dawn, Grayson walked the docks one more time. The sun climbed over the horizon, turning the carriers into silhouettes of gold. Sailors saluted as he passed. Officers nodded respectfully. And somewhere behind him, Reynolds jogged to catch up, toolbox in hand. Sir, Grayson turned. Reynolds smiled. You said to bring gloves. I'm ready. Grayson smiled back, the first genuine, full smile in years. And let's make sure she stays alive. From the command tower, Admiral Pierce watched the two figures walk toward the Liberty Hawk's open hangar bay, the old commander and the young Marine, side by side. He turned to Anderson. You see that, Captain? That's the Navy's real power. Not the ships, not the weapons, men like him. Anderson nodded. And the ones who finally learned to listen. As the morning light spread across the sea, the Liberty Hawk prepared for her next mission, stronger, wiser, and alive once more. And though Thomas Grayson didn't seek fame or forgiveness, the Navy quietly recorded his name again in its active roster. Commander, Ret. Thomas A. Grayson, Engineering Consultant. United States Navy, because legends don't fade. They return when they're needed most. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly beneath a bruised sky, dark clouds churning like a living beast. On the deck of the USS Liberty Hawk, sailors scrambled as winds howled and rain slashed across the steel surface. The carrier had faced storms before, but this one was different. A typhoon was forming faster than forecasts predicted. Communication lines flickered, radar screens blurred, and the sea below was rising into monstrous walls of water. In the heart of the ship, Commander Thomas Grayson stood before the engineering control console, his gray hair plastered to his forehead, his eyes locked on the power readings. Around him, young technicians and engineers barked updates, their voices tense. Sir, Generator 3 is running hot. Coolant systems are compensating, but voltage is dropping. Backup relays engaged, but they're fluctuating under the surge. Grayson's voice cut through the chaos, calm but commanding. Don't fight the storm. Flow with it. Stabilize the secondary conduits manually. And somebody get me Reynolds. Moments later, Corporal Jake Reynolds burst into the control room, soaked to the bone, clutching a wrench in one hand. Reporting, sir. Grayson pointed to a panel. Reactor 2's balance regulator is slipping. I need you in maintenance shaft, B3. Tighten that flow valve exactly 22 degrees. Clockwise, not a hair more. Reynolds blinked. How do you even know that? Grayson smiled faintly, rainwater dripping from his brow. Because I built her lungs. Now go before she stops breathing. Reynolds didn't hesitate. He sprinted down the corridor, boots splashing through puddles as the ship groaned under the assault of the storm. Above deck, Waves towered higher than the hangar bay doors. Fighter jets were chained down, helicopters secured, but the entire ship seemed to tremble with every crash. The Liberty Hawk was 300,000 tons of power, yet nature was proving it could still make her bow. In the bridge, Captain Anderson gripped the railing. "Helm, adjust heading 2 points north. We're drifting off course." The helmsman shouted over the roar. "Aye, sir, but steering sluggish. Hydraulic pressures dropping." Admiral Pierce, who had insisted on joining the mission to oversee Grayson's new system, stood at the center of the command deck, eyes sharp despite the chaos. "Engineering, report." Grayson's voice crackled through the comms. "We're compensating for overloads. Power's stable for now, but the storm's testing every circuit we have." Pierce replied firmly, "Do whatever it takes to keep her alive, Commander. I trust you." A flicker of pride passed through Grayson's chest. The Admiral's words meant more than any metal could. Down below, Reynolds crawled into shaft B3, where heat and vibration pulsed like a living heart. Steam hissed from vents, and the sound of machinery was deafening. He located the flow valve, glowing red under the strain. He wiped sweat from his brow and shouted into his headset, "Found it. It's burning hot. I can barely get near it." Grayson's voice came through, steady and precise. "You can do it, Marine. Remember, 22 degrees. No more, no less." Reynolds braced himself, wrapped his gloved hands around the valve wheel, and turned. It resisted, the metal squealed in protest, but it moved. 20 degrees, 21, 22. The moment he hit it, the vibration eased. Pressure readings on Grayson's console stabilized. Lights shifted from red to green. Grayson exhaled slowly. "Good work, Reynolds. Get back up here." The old girl just took her first breath of calm. But the storm wasn't done yet. Lightning ripped across the sky, striking the sea so close that the deck lit up in blinding white. The Liberty Hawk heaved sideways, metal screaming. "Brace!" shouted Anderson from the bridge. The ship tilted dangerously before stabilizing again, engines fighting against the swell. Pierce leaned over the console. "Status on the power core?" "Nominal," said Anderson, "but we just lost external comms. Satellites are offline." Pierce frowned. "Then we're alone out here." In engineering, alarms suddenly flared again, this time different. A sharp, pulsing sound echoed through the room. A technician shouted, "Magnetic containment field weakening. Reactor 3. Grayson's face went pale. "That's impossible. We stabilized it hours ago." He pulled up the diagnostic. The readings didn't make sense. Voltage spikes in perfect sequence, almost as if someone was forcing the overload. His instincts screamed. "This isn't the storm," he said grimly. "Someone's tampering with the system." The room fell silent. Reynolds, just returning, froze. "Sir, are you saying it's sabotage?" Grayson's eyes narrowed. "Or a leftover virus from the redesign I warned them about. Either way, if it triggers again, it'll breach containment." Pierce's voice came over the comms. "Grayson, talk to me." "Sir," Grayson replied, "we've got a cascading overload forming in the secondary reactor, possibly a cyber interference. If we don't reroute manually, the ship's engines could detonate from internal pressure." "Do what you have to," Pierce ordered. "You have full authority." Grayson turned to his team. "We're doing this old school. Shut down the digital relays. I want full manual control." One of the young technicians hesitated. "Sir, if we cut digital access, we'll lose monitoring. Then trust your eyes." Grayson barked. "Look at the gauges, not the screens." He grabbed a wrench and headed for the lower deck, Reynolds following close behind. They reached the core chamber, a cathedral of machinery and light. Blue energy pulsed behind reinforced glass. Sparks flew from panels as circuits overloaded. "Reynolds, override that containment lock." The Marine strained against the lever. "It's jammed." "Then use your muscle, son," Grayson shouted. With a roar, Reynolds pulled with all his strength. The lever broke free. Power readings steadied for a moment. Then, another surge. Grayson's eyes widened. The virus is cycling through backup nodes. It's adapting. How do we stop it? Reynolds yelled. Grayson looked up at the humming reactor, realization dawning. We don't. We reset it. Manually. Reynolds blinked. That'll cut all power to the ship. Grayson nodded grimly. Better dark than dead? Up on the bridge, lights flickered as Pierce heard Grayson's last words. Captain, brace your crew. We're going dark. Anderson turned to him. Sir? Pierce's tone was final. You heard the man. He's the reason we're still afloat. In engineering, Grayson moved to the master control valve. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from memory. He had done this once before, decades ago, in a fire that claimed his son. Reynolds looked at him, concerned. Sir, are you sure you want to? Grayson met his eyes. This time, no one dies. He pulled the lever. The world went black. For 10 long seconds, the Liberty Hawk floated in total darkness. No engines. No lights. Just the sound of the raging sea. Then, slowly, one by one, the lights began to return. Auxiliary systems hummed to life. Backup generators kicked in. Power stabilized. Reynolds stared in disbelief. You did it? You actually did it. Grayson gave a weary smile. She just needed to rest a moment. On the bridge, Admiral Pierce let out a long breath. Power restored, Anderson confirmed. All systems stable? Pierce looked out at the sea, the storm beginning to fade. Tell engineering. Well done. The comms officer relayed the message. Down below, when Grayson heard the Admiral's words, he didn't respond. He simply nodded, eyes closed, letting the moment wash over him. For the first time in decades, he felt peace. When dawn broke the next morning, the sky was clear and calm. The ocean stretched out, golden and serene. The Liberty Hawk moved forward steadily, as if the storm had never existed. Pierce gathered the bridge crew. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, the systems we tested under Hellfire held strong. That's not luck, that's design. That's the work of one man who refused to give up on the sea. Down in engineering, Reynolds found Grayson asleep at his desk, grease on his hands, the faintest smile on his lips. Reynolds whispered, You saved her, sir. Grayson opened one eye, exhaustion giving way to quiet satisfaction. No, son, he said softly. She saved herself. I just reminded her how. The sun rose over the San Diego harbor, casting golden light across the rows of aircraft carriers docked in orderly formation. Today was no ordinary morning. Today, the Navy was holding a special ceremony, not for a battle won or a mission completed, but for the man who had saved the USS Liberty Hawk and, perhaps, the entire Pacific Fleet. Word had spread fast. Sailors, officers, engineers, Marines, everyone who had witnessed Thomas Grayson's skill, courage, and quiet heroism gathered along the pier. Even the young technicians he had guided for weeks stood at attention, eyes wide with respect. Grayson himself arrived quietly, dressed in his old Navy jacket with his faded insignia pinned neatly. He had refused to wear a new uniform. He said he didn't need the ceremony to validate him. The work itself had been enough. But the Navy had insisted. Captain Anderson, standing at the front of the dock, called the crew to order. Attention! The voices of hundreds of men and women echoed across the harbor, mixed with the distant calls of seagulls. Grayson felt a strange pull in his chest. He wasn't accustomed to attention. He had spent decades working in silence, in shadows. And yet, standing there, he realized that today, he wasn't just a man. He was a symbol. Admiral Jonathan Pierce stepped forward, his presence commanding the crowd's attention. He held a folded document in his hands, the Presidential Commendation for Heroism, engraved with Grayson's name. "Ladies and gentlemen," Pierce began, voice firm but tinged with emotion. "Today we honor a man whose courage and brilliance have saved lives, preserved vessels, and reminded us all of the power of experience, wisdom, and dedication." He gestured toward Grayson. Commander Thomas Andrew Grayson built the heart of the USS Liberty Hawk. He returned when she faltered. He faced storms, both human and natural, that would have overwhelmed even the strongest among us. And he did it all without seeking recognition, without asking for reward. Grayson's hands tightened at his sides, the words washing over him. Pierce continued, "Today, on behalf of the United States Navy, the President, and every sailor aboard the Pacific Fleet, I present this commendation in acknowledgement of your heroism and lifelong service." Reynolds, standing among the Marines, felt a lump in his throat. He remembered the first time he had mocked Grayson, betting that the old man couldn't power the carrier. He had been wrong in every way possible. He looked at Grayson, now standing tall, every scar, every line on his face telling a story of years spent mastering machinery, mastering himself. He could see it in the eyes of everyone gathered, awe, respect, and gratitude that went deeper than words. Grayson stepped forward, the folded document placed gently into his hands. The crowd held its collective breath. He began, voice quiet at first. "I didn't do this alone. Every sailor, every engineer, every Marine on board helped keep the ship alive. I merely reminded her how to breathe." He paused, swallowing hard. "But I thank you for this honor. I never sought it, but it is humbling to know my work matters still." The crowd erupted in applause. Cheers and shouts filled the harbor. The sailors saluted, some with tears glistening in their eyes. As the applause subsided, Grayson noticed a young officer approaching him, Lieutenant Commander Harper. She handed him a small box. Inside was a model of the Liberty Hawk, hand-painted, with each detail etched perfectly. A note read, "To the man who gave her life again. From the crew who owe you everything." Grayson's hands shook slightly. He held it close, feeling the weight of years, of loss, of redemption. Reynolds nudged him gently. "Sir, maybe now you can finally take a break." Grayson chuckled softly. "Perhaps, but only long enough to watch the next generation take the helm." Pierce stepped forward again. "One more thing," he said, tone low but powerful. "There is one tradition left, one gesture reserved for those who have earned the Navy's deepest respect." He raised his hand in a sharp salute. "For Commander Thomas A. Grayson, the Admiral of the fleet, extends this salute, a gesture of utmost respect, courage, and honor." The moment was electric. The entire assembly mirrored the salute, a wave of reverence sweeping across the pier. Grayson returned it slowly, the gesture connecting decades of service, sacrifice, and skill into a single, unforgettable moment. For Reynolds, the Marine who had once doubted him, it was a lesson that would never fade. For the sailors and officers who had witnessed his genius, it was a reminder that courage and wisdom often come from unexpected places. After the ceremony, Grayson walked along the pier, the sound of waves mingling with distant ship horns. He paused at the edge, looking at the Liberty Hawk, its hull gleaming in the morning sun. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "She's safe now. You're all safe now." Reynolds caught up, walking beside him. "Sir, where will you go now?" Grayson smiled, eyes distant. "The sea is still calling me. I think it always will." Reynolds shook his head, smiling. Guess some lessons never end. Grayson laughed quietly. No, Marine. Some lessons last a lifetime. The next few weeks were a blur. Grayson oversaw final implementations of his redesigned systems across the fleet, visited younger crews, and mentored new engineers. Each day, he quietly returned to the places he once haunted with doubt and loss, leaving behind knowledge and calm assurance. The Navy officially reinstated him as an honorary consultant, but Grayson's heart remained on the deck of the ships he had built. Titles, medals, and ceremonies were secondary. The real reward was the knowledge that lives had been saved, and that the ships would continue to sail strong. One evening, as the sun set over the Pacific, Reynolds found him alone on the Liberty Hawk's flight deck. "You ever regret coming back?" Reynolds asked. Grayson looked out at the horizon, waves glinting like fire. "Every day I walked away from this life," he said softly. "I regretted it. But I couldn't face the past until I knew it could be fixed." Reynolds nodded. "And now?" "Now," Grayson said, "I can let the past rest." "And the future?" "Well, that's in good hands." Reynolds looked at him, admiration shining in his eyes. "Thank you, sir." "For everything." Grayson chuckled, ruffling the Marine's hair. "Just promise me you'll never underestimate the old ones again." Reynolds laughed. "I'll never make that mistake, sir." The Liberty Hawk sailed into the horizon, engines steady, turbines humming in perfect rhythm. The storm had passed, the threat had been neutralized, and the Pacific lay calm. Somewhere behind the carrier, on a small vessel heading south, Thomas Grayson watched the silhouette of the ship fade into the distance. He didn't need to be on it anymore. He had left a part of himself embedded in every bolt, every circuit, every system. The sea whispered around him, carrying the memory of the storm, the blackout, and the triumph. And somewhere, above the waves, the salute of an admiral echoed in eternity, a recognition not just of a man, but of a life of service, courage, and unmatched brilliance. Grayson took a deep breath of the salty air. For the first time in decades, he felt complete. He whispered softly, "Fair winds, Liberty Hawk, always." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, the ocean reflected the gold and crimson sky, a world forever safer, because of one old man who refused to be underestimated.